Welcome. Sit with me for a moment. No rush, no noise, no performance required, just this. A quiet conversation about a quiet kind of person. Today, we are talking about self-sufficient introverts. Not the shy ones who secretly wish they were at the party. Not the anxious ones who avoid people out of fear. We are talking about a very specific and often misunderstood type of human being, the person who genuinely, deeply, authentically prefers to be alone, not because the world hurt them, not because they gave up on connection, but because solitude for them is not a punishment. It is a privilege. And if you are that person, or if you love that person, or if you have ever wondered why someone would choose silence over applause, this conversation is for you. Let us start at the beginning. Most of us grew up in a world that told us, loudly and constantly, that people are supposed to want attention. We were taught that the goal is to be liked, followed, noticed, celebrated.
Children who raised their hands got praised. Students who spoke up in class got gold stars. Adults who networked, socialized, and performed got promotions, popularity, and partnerships. And quietly, in the corner of every classroom, every office, every family gathering, sat someone who did not quite understand what all the noise was for. That person was not broken. That person was not suffering. That person was simply wired differently. And the tragedy is not that they preferred solitude. The tragedy is that the world spent years trying to fix something that was never a problem. Self-sufficient introverts do not prefer solitude because they are antisocial. They prefer it because they are so deeply, richly social with themselves that external noise often feels like an interruption rather than an invitation. Think about that for a moment. What if your own inner world was so interesting, so full, so alive, that leaving it to go perform for an audience felt like stepping away from a magnificent feast to eat cardboard? That is what solitude feels like for a self-sufficient introvert. Not emptiness, fullness. Now let us talk about what self-sufficiency actually means, because this word matters. Self-sufficiency does not mean coldness. It does not mean arrogance. It does not mean the person does not need anyone ever. It means something much more specific and much more powerful. A self-sufficient introvert has built an interior life so complete, so nourishing, so sustaining, that they are not dependent on external validation to feel whole. They do not need someone to tell them they are interesting to believe it. They do not need an audience to feel alive. They do not need to be seen to feel real. And this is rare. This is genuinely rare. Most people, extroverts and introverts alike, have a quiet hunger for approval. We post things online and wait for the response. We say something at a gathering and watch people's faces to see if it landed. We measure our worth against the reactions of others. The self-sufficient introvert has, through years of inner work, or simply through nature, broken this loop. They have found the source inside themselves. And once you find the source inside, you stop thirsting at other people's wells. This does not make them cold. This makes them free. Let us talk about energy, because energy is everything when it comes to understanding introverts. You have probably heard the basic explanation. Introverts lose energy in social situations and recharge alone. Extroverts gain energy from people. Introverts gain it from solitude. Simple enough. But this explanation, while useful, is incomplete for self-sufficient introverts. For the truly self-sufficient introvert, solitude is not just a recharge station. It is the primary mode of living. It is where their real life happens. Social interaction, even enjoyable social interaction, is something they participate in alongside their real life, not as the main event. Imagine you have a favorite room in your house, a room that is perfectly arranged, perfectly lit, full of everything you love. Books, plants, music, warmth, silence, your own thoughts. You could live there forever and feel rich. Now imagine someone keeps knocking on the door and asking you to come out and stand in the middle of a busy intersection for a few hours. Some days you go, some days the people in the intersection are lovely, but at the end of it, you always want to go back to your room, not because the intersection was terrible, but because the room is yours. That is the self-sufficient introvert's relationship with solitude and society. Society is the intersection. Solitude is the room, and the room always wins. Now, here is something important. Here is something the world often gets wrong. Choosing solitude is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. It is the ache of wanting connection and not having it. It is the silence that feels empty, cold, and heavy. Solitude, chosen, welcomed, loved solitude, is the opposite. It is the silence that feels full. It is the aloneness that feels like company. It is the state of being with yourself and actually enjoying who you are spending time with. Self-sufficient introverts have cracked a code that many people never crack. They have made peace with themselves. They have become someone they genuinely enjoy being with. And so, when they are alone, they are not missing something. They are in the presence of the one person they trust most, themselves. Think about how rare and how difficult that is. Think about how many people are alone and immediately reach for their phone, their television, their noise, their distraction, because being alone with themselves is uncomfortable. Because the silence reveals something they would rather not face. The self-sufficient introvert does not run from that silence. They run toward it, because in that silence there is no performance, there is no mask, there is no role to play. There is only the raw, unedited, authentic self, and they find that self fascinating. Let us talk about attention specifically, because the title of our conversation today is about why self-sufficient introverts prefer solitude over attention. Attention is interesting. Attention is seductive. Most of us want it more than we admit. Even people who claim to hate attention will often take it when it is offered, because attention is a form of being recognized. And being recognized is one of the deepest human needs. But for self-sufficient introverts, something different happens with attention. Attention from others requires something in return. It requires performance. It requires the maintenance of an image. It requires showing up in a way that is legible, appealing, and consistent to an external audience. And for a self-sufficient introvert, this transaction feels deeply expensive. It is not that they never want to be understood. It is not that they never want to be seen. It is that the cost of seeking public attention, the compromise of authenticity, the energy of performance, the maintenance of a public self, feels far too high compared to the reward. They would rather be deeply known by one or two people who truly understand them than broadly recognized by hundreds who only know the performance. And here is the quiet truth underneath all of this. Self-sufficient introverts are often intensely private, not because they are hiding something shameful, but because they consider their interior life sacred. They do not share it freely because it is precious. Casting your inner world into the noise of public attention feels to them like throwing pearls into a muddy river. Why would you do that? Their solitude is where they are most fully themselves, and they protect that space the way other people protect their most precious relationships, with care, with boundaries, with love. There is something else worth understanding. Self-sufficient introverts tend to be exceptional at being with their own thoughts, and this is no small thing. Most people are terrified of their own thoughts. There is a famous study, and you may have heard of it, where researchers found that people would rather give themselves mild electric shocks than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and they chose pain over that silence. Self-sufficient introverts do not experience this. For them, the mind is not a threat. It is a landscape, a place to wander, to build, to explore, to question. They are their own best conversation partner. They can spend an afternoon entirely inside their own mind and emerge refreshed, energized, and full of ideas. This ability, this rare, beautiful, slightly misunderstood ability, is one of the reasons they prefer solitude. Because in solitude, the mind is free. There is no need to translate your thinking into words someone else will understand. There is no need to pace your thoughts to match a conversation. There is no need to perform curiosity or enthusiasm or agreement. The mind can simply move, freely, in any direction it wants. For a person who loves thinking, and self-sufficient introverts almost universally love thinking, this freedom is intoxicating. The idea of interrupting it to go seek attention can feel genuinely baffling. Why would I leave this to go stand somewhere and be looked at? Let us also talk about depth, because self-sufficient introverts tend to be drawn to depth over breadth in almost everything, including relationships. They would rather have one profound conversation than 20 pleasant ones. They would rather know one subject with extraordinary intimacy than skim across many subjects. They would rather have 2 or 3 deep, trusted friendships than a wide social network of surface-level connections. This orientation toward depth is actually one of the reasons attention feels so unappealing to them. Attention, public attention especially, tends to be wide and shallow. Many people looking, few people seeing. Many people reacting, few people understanding. Many people commenting, almost no one genuinely connecting. The self-sufficient introvert can feel the difference instantly, and the shallowness of broad attention, compared to the richness of genuine solitude, makes solitude the obvious choice every time. This is not snobbery. This is not elitism. This is simply a difference in what feels nourishing. A person who has eaten a rich, full, deeply satisfying meal is not being snobby when they pass on fast food. They have simply tasted something better, and they know the difference. Now, I want to address something that comes up often when we talk about introverts and solitude, and it is this: the assumption that something must have gone wrong. People hear that someone prefers to be alone, and they immediately look for the wound. They think, something must have happened. Someone must have hurt them. Some rejection, some trauma, some painful social experience must have driven them inward. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes people retreat into solitude because the world has wounded them. That is real, and it deserves care and attention and healing. But self-sufficient introverts who genuinely, organically, naturally prefer solitude are not wounded. They are not hiding. They are not waiting to be rescued or coaxed back into the social world. They simply found something in their own company that they cannot find anywhere else, and they chose it freely, with full awareness, not as a last resort, but as a first choice. Treating that choice as a symptom of damage is itself a form of damage. It sends the message that there is only one right way to be human, sociable, visible, available, and that anyone who diverges from that template is broken. Self-sufficient introverts are not broken, they are just different, and that difference deserves to be understood, respected, and, if you are one of these people, deeply, unapologetically claimed. Let us spend a few minutes talking about what solitude actually gives the self-sufficient introvert, because solitude is not just the absence of other people, it is a positive, active, generative state for these individuals. In solitude, they create, whether it is art, writing, music, code, ideas, plans, theories, recipes, gardens. The creative impulse thrives in uninterrupted space. Many of history's most prolific creators were intensely solitary people, not because isolation forced them to create, but because creation requires a kind of concentrated attention that is almost impossible to sustain in constant social noise. In solitude, they process. Life is confusing and complex and full of sensation. Self-sufficient introverts often absorb experiences very deeply. They feel things acutely, notice details that others miss, are affected by stimuli that others barely register. Solitude is where all of that input gets processed, sorted, understood. Without it, they feel cluttered, overwhelmed, out of touch with themselves. In solitude, they grow. Real self-reflection requires time and quiet, the kind of growth that comes from looking honestly at yourself, questioning your assumptions, understanding your patterns, revising your beliefs. This does not happen in a crowd. It happens in stillness. And self-sufficient introverts are often some of the most genuinely self-aware people you will ever meet, precisely because they invest so much time in this kind of interior work. In solitude, they rest. Not sleep, rest. The rest that comes from not having to be anything for anyone, the rest of letting the social mask fall off and just being. This kind of rest is as necessary as sleep for introverts, and as impossible to replicate in company as sleep itself. Let us also speak honestly about what happens when self-sufficient introverts are pushed too hard against their nature, when they are pressured to socialize constantly, to be more available, to show up more visibly, to want more attention, they do not flourish. They do not blossom. They diminish, not dramatically, not in ways that are always visible, but inside something dims. The inner world that was rich and full and alive begins to feel like a room that no one has time to visit anymore. The thoughts that were once so clear and exciting begin to feel crowded out by noise. The sense of self that was so solid begins to feel like it is performing rather than living. This is the real cost of forcing introverts into extroverted existence. Not social awkwardness, not failed small talk, but the slow erosion of the very qualities that make them who they are, their depth, their inner richness, their extraordinary relationship with their own mind. And here is the paradox. When you let a self-sufficient introvert be exactly who they are, when you remove the pressure to perform and seek and be seen, they often become more present in relationships, not less, more generous in conversations, not less, more alive to the world, not less, because they are coming from a place of fullness rather than depletion. Solitude does not make them distant. It makes them available, genuinely, deeply, authentically available, in the moments when they choose to show up. I want to close with something personal, something that feels important to say directly. If you are a self-sufficient introvert, I want you to hear this clearly. Your preference for solitude is not a flaw. It is not a phase. It is not something you need to apologize for, explain endlessly, or try to fix. The world will tell you to come out more, to be more social, to put yourself out there, to want the attention, the recognition, the visibility that everyone else seems to want. And you can nod politely and go back to your quiet life with a clean conscience, because you know something that is hard to articulate to people who have not felt it. You know what it is like to be utterly at home inside yourself. You know what it is like to find a conversation with your own thoughts more interesting than most conversations with people. You know what it is like to look at a free afternoon, wide open, unscheduled, unbothered, and feel not anxiety, but joy. You know what it is like to feel most fully yourself when there is no one watching. And that is not loneliness. That is not sadness. That is not isolation. That is freedom. That is wholeness. That is a kind of self-possession that most people spend their entire lives searching for and never quite finding. Your solitude is not a retreat from life. It is where your real life lives. And for those of you who love a self-sufficient introvert, whether that is a partner, a child, a parent, a friend, I want to leave you with this. Do not try to rescue them from their quiet. Do not mistake their contentment for loneliness. Do not read their preference for solitude as rejection of you. When they choose an evening alone over a party, they are not saying they do not love you. When they go quiet in a crowd, they are not being rude. When they seem most alive and most themselves in stillness, they are showing you something true and precious about who they are. Love them in their language. Love. Offer depth rather than breadth. Choose quality over frequency. Respect the boundary of their inner world and wait to be invited in, because when they do invite you in, into that rich, quiet, carefully tended interior space, you will understand immediately why they protect it so fiercely. It is because it is the most real place they know. Thank you for spending this time in quiet conversation. For a self-sufficient introvert, being understood, truly understood, is one of the few things that matters as much as solitude itself. And today, perhaps, we have moved a little closer to that understanding. Until next time, enjoy your own company. It is better than you have been told.